Whatever.
I don't know if it's recording. Is it recording? I think it's recording, right?
It seems like there would be a counter, right?
Oh, the seconds.
Oh, there. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So, my first question. This is regarding media bias. First of all, do I have your permission to record it and later transcribe it?
Yes, you do.
Okay. So, Professor, my first question is, what, if any, is the substantiating evidence that the media is politically biased?
Substantiating evidence.
Yes. Do you believe that there is evidence to support the claim that the media is politically biased in favor of one political bias over another?
I think that evidence could be found. I don't have any examples off the top of my head, but I think if you did any examination of either Fox or MSNBC, and probably at times CNN, even though they try to stay in the middle, I'm sure you could find it. I can't think of an example for you at the moment.
So do you think that journalism students and journalism reporters, when they go into the field and they report for an organization, do you believe that they bring in their own personal biases towards reporting?
I do think that they do. I think everyone does. We all do. What I try to tell my students is to be self-aware, to self-examine, and to be aware of what their preferences might be, what their biases might be, what they may like or dislike, because of their background, because of their family, because of their history. So I don't think we can eliminate our biases, but I think as reporters, if we are cognizant of them and work really hard to be fair in spite of what your leanings might be, I think that's the best we can do.
So let's talk about this bias, whether it's intentional or unintentional.
Okay.
Do you believe that this bias affects public perception and because of that trust in the media?
I'm sure it does. I think one way you can look at how bias might affect media content is just in story selection. So just to think about what in the story selection process, what gets pitched. Reporters come into the newsroom with ideas of stories that they want to cover. News managers have ideas about the stories they want to cover. Assignment desk editors have ideas. Everyone's bringing in these things that they believe are important. So there's an inherent bias in just what is even being suggested to go into the news cycle. We're not going to pitch things that we don't like or we don't think are important. So we're not going to discuss those things. So already there's some bias at play. Just in that pool that we're looking at, should we cover this? So then we select from that pool. So I think there's bias right out of the gate. Just in that selection of what we think is important to put into the news cycle. How it might affect viewers, I'm sure that's measurable. I'm sure someone could do some research on that. I'm sure research is being done on that. I would say, depending on who is viewing, who's consuming that content, and what their perceptions are, they may agree with the slant of the news organization that they're consuming content from. So it may not be noticeable to them. It's like preacher choir, they're all on the same page. If it goes against what they believe, then perhaps it will rub them the wrong way, and they may fault the news organization as being not credible or not doing a good job or presenting an agenda. So I think it kind of depends on who the viewer is or who the consumer is.
Is the bias an intentional act, do you believe? The political bias, do you believe that some of it is
I think it can be. I think it definitely can be. I think a lot of times at a small level, reporters in local newsrooms, I think, are exercising bias that they may very well not be aware of. They may be making choices and decisions that are very unintentional. They may contain bias, but they may not be cognizant of that. But there is another level where we're getting to a higher level of corporate decision making about content and about the way content is presented. And I do think that there can be agendas behind that, very intentional agendas. Have you seen the documentary, is it called Foxified? It's about Fox News. And it's 5 to 10 years old, I think, at least. But it does get into some memos that the documentary maker had access to from Roger Ailes, who put out an agenda to his news managers of a certain slant, a certain direction that he wanted them to go, a certain language that he wanted them to use, or I think they might have been framed as buzzwords. So I do think that, yes, at a corporate level, at a managerial level, there are certainly times when intentional decisions are made to shape content in a political direction.
So you believe then that while some of it may be intentional bias, for the large part, it's an inadvertent consequence of personal opinions and perspectives?
Oftentimes I think so. I think people who go into the news business, I think they generally go into journalism because they have some ideals and they have some ideas about this, sort of a public service that they want to do. So I don't think, in the large majority, journalists go into this line of work with an agenda. They usually go in because they think that they're going to do good work in the name of, serving the public. And so I think a lot of it is absolutely unintentional. It's not necessarily done by journalists on the ground who are saying to themselves, I have a mission, today I'm going to accomplish this. But I do think that happens at a higher level.
So if an organization does have intentional biases like Fox and MSNBC,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes CNN, as you've said, and plays that bias just for better ratings or for a specific audience or whatever it may be, do those actions by those individual media corporations, do they affect the perception of the media as a whole?
I think they affect public perception in what they're putting out, right? I think there are a lot of people sitting in living rooms that are either watching TV or if they're in their cars listening to this content on the radio, who are influenced by what they're hearing. They oftentimes don't question what they're hearing. They believe it, they hear it, and it has an impact on them. It influences decisions that they make. If you're asking me, so I think it affects people in that way. If you're asking, does it affect people in the sense that they don't like the media or they think the media is doing a bad job? I think there is a degree of that where there are people who, if we kind of look back in time to when it was Dan Rather, when it was Cronkite, some of the very trusted news faces that, people would come home every night and turn on CBS or turn on NBC, and these were the people that they trusted to tell them about the world. We're in a different place now, for sure. I think that in large part the audience realizes that these media companies have to make money. In making money, they have to sell a product. They have to appeal to advertisers. And they have to wrap that product up in an appealing way that will entice people to consume it. So I do think that the audience is pretty savvy in assessing that the media, in saying the media, news isn't always just to inform you. A lot of times it's about selling consumer products. And I do think that there's a level of awareness among people about that. And I do think that people are critical of news organizations. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
What steps do you think the media should take to recover the general trust of the public?
I almost feel like they have to throw out the advertising if they were really going to do that. But even when you look at forms of public media, whether it's National Public Radio or public broadcasting, someone is still paying for that content. So if you are going to attract sponsors to provide underwriting, you still have to create a product that is appealing to first an audience, and then after you assemble that audience, then that audience needs to be appealing to those sponsors, to those underwriters, or in a commercial environment to those advertisers. So it's really hard to have a journalism model, because journalism obviously has to be sustained in some way, that's free of influence from some sort of outside pressure, some outside source. So it's really hard to imagine a journalism model that would be successful, that would be free of influence, that could regain public trust, that that organization wasn't being driven by some agenda in some way. Because if you think about it, every news organization is driven by at least at the bare minimum, the agenda of making money. They have to pay to do this, right? Something has to support it. So somehow they have to make money. And that is obviously going to influence what they're doing.
Right. But that's not going to happen anytime soon, is it?
No, way back in the day, in the early ages of television, the news product was not expected to make money. It was a trade-off that, just a minute, it was a trade-off that broadcasters had to provide this public service of providing information, and they weren't expected to make a profit off of it. It was what they owed to their audience. That was a more pure model of journalism than what we have right now.
Okay, and my last question would be...
Can you see if that's my daughter? Sorry.